What's up, guys? It's Rowan
and Brooklyn here from Smart TV, giving you another episode of the HSC English Lit Program, affectionately known as #Help. One of the key areas that we see students struggling with in the HSC is analysis. It's one of those key skills you need to develop in the HSC to do really well and make sure that you get those band sixes. It's even more important now that we have the new HSC syllabus coming in, because we need to learn how to write analysis on the spot and we can't just memorize it.
Now, in this episode, we're going to be diving in and showing you how to analyse King Henry IV Part 1. Now, this is part of Module B in HSC Advanced English. And one of the things that we've found from years of supporting students through the HSC is that Shakespeare tends to be one of those things that causes a lot of students to become a little unstuck. It's challenging to understand, it can be more difficult to analyse. And so what we're hoping to do in this episode is really to show you the steps that are required in how you would break down any Shakespeare play, for that matter, in terms of analysis. Now, of course, we're using King Henry IV as the example, but really we're going to be also teaching you the skills that you need so that if you're doing The Tempest or you're doing The Merchant of Venice, as other examples.
Or if you're one of those unlucky STEM students doing A Midsummer Night's Dream. I haven't actually heard of any of them. They're a myth as far as I know, but apparently they exist.
So if you are one of those students, you're going to need to learn how to analyse Shakespeare, and that's what our hope here will be. It'll help you learn how to analyse and also equip you for Henry IV. So in the process, we're also going to show you how to construct a really powerful paragraph. So, Brooklyn, what's the key idea that we're going to be exploring and unpacking as we analyse King Henry IV today?
Great. So the key focus idea that we're going to look at sort of as our topic sentence for our paragraph is going to be honour. And that's a pretty popular topic to look at in King Henry. So I guess what the point here is we don't just want to say in our topic sentence, we're going to talk about honour. We want to go a bit deeper than that and say, okay, what is it that we're actually going to say about honour? And that's really what's going to help us create that critical voice that we need in Module B. Because if we just talk about honour flatly, say, we're talking about honour, that's not critical, that's not showing that you have your own perspective. Everybody knows that honour is a theme in King Henry. What you need to do is look at a theme and show, okay, what is your perspective on this theme? What is your own personal interpretation? So what we're going to do is go through our own personal interpretation of this, which is looking at how there are a few different ways that honour is shown in King Henry, a few different conflicting and contrasting ways. And I guess the core thing is how these conflicting, contrasting ways of looking at honour influence Hal's honour at the end and his pursuit of honour at the end of the play. Great.
So one of the things we've highlighted here is, you've got to have an idea, of course, that you're unpacking, and particularly in a paragraph. It's important that it's not just about the theme honour, right? We've got to say something about honour. And in our case, we're going to be unpacking the different types of honour that we see in King Henry and the way, therefore, it influences Hal in his own pursuit of honour. So that's really what we're unpacking. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So what's our first quote, Rowan, for this paragraph?
Our first quote comes from the very first scene in the play. And this is when King Henry says he wants a son who is the theme of honour's tongue. Amongst a grove, the very straightest plant.
All right. And in English?
So King Henry here is really talking about Hotspur. And he's saying that Hotspur is so honourable that if honour was a person, Hotspur would be the main theme that he talked about. And not only is he saying that, he's also saying if we think about a grove, which is just a group of trees, Hotspur would also be the tallest and straightest tree. So he would be the most honourable of all.
Yeah, great, exactly. So there's a couple of techniques that we can see here. You sort of already pointed out this idea that he's talking about honour as if it's a person. So our obvious technique for that is personification. And the effect of this is that he's really emphasising Hotspur's honour so much that Hotspur actually becomes a paragon of honour. And a paragon is when a person or a thing is represented as a perfect example of a concept. So that concept is honour, and Hotspur is the perfect example of that.
Great. So now this is only half the quote. So the other half of the quote really describes what Hotspur's honour is like. So he's got honour, most honourable. What is it like? And so the king describes it like a straight tree, right? And this metaphor is a great representation of the sort of honour we see from Hotspur throughout the play. So the fact that his honour is always straightforward. You know, if someone wrongs him, the honourable thing is to get revenge, right? It's a pretty simple, straightforward framework for honour. And he doesn't hide behind fancy language and metaphors like we see Hal do throughout the play.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I guess that brings us to our next point about Hotspur's honour being so straightforward and honest. Doesn't have all these like fancy ideas like Henry and Hal do, and as Rowan just said, like he doesn't use all that metaphorical language. He just wants his revenge. He's just like, you've hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. I want revenge. There's no sort of trickery or manipulation behind it. There's no performance. So we have this quote here, and the quote is, "Will be revenged on him." We being Hotspur and all his mates who want to get King Henry back. So yeah, I guess we can see here he's not speaking in the sort of fluffy metaphors, talking about trees and groves like King Henry does, and a lot of the other characters do.
So then, if we're not talking about, you know, metaphorical, figurative, poetic language here, what's the technique that we're using?
Yeah, so that's where it gets interesting. That's kind of exactly the point. Our technique is almost that there is no technique, which seems like a sort of silly, counterintuitive thing to say in an essay, and don't word it like that. I guess what we need to remember is when we're analysing quotes, what we're doing is we're looking at how the language features that a poet or an author or a playwright is using is creating a meaning or effect. And what Shakespeare is doing here is he's creating meaning from the fact that Hotspur doesn't have fancy language, and that meaning sort of is able to elucidate Hotspur's character itself, that he's just a straightforward guy. He just says what he wants, and he doesn't hide it behind all this fancy language.
So now Hotspur even points this out himself, right? So he has a bit of a rant about how much he hates poetry, which, you know, just as a side point, sort of funny because it's Shakespeare that's writing this, and it's anyway, that's a whole little side point that I think's nice and humorous. But he calls it mincing poetry, which is basically, you know, that he finds poetry contrived and irritating, which is probably how you feel sometimes, by the way, when you read Shakespeare.
Great. So, yeah, we've just looked at one of the versions of honour in the play. And in complete contrast to this, we have Falstaff's style of honour. And he just sees honour as a complete construct. He barely even believes it exists. He thinks it's this idea that kings have created in order to make people do what they say. And make people go to war. So basically the way Falstaff sees it is honour is just a performance. People are just sort of deceiving people through this idea of honour.
And before we move on this, I think what's interesting is, at least personally, like I find through both these characters, they're both, as you've highlighted, at sort of polar ends, right, of perspectives, but they're both very compelling in their own ways in terms of, you know, there's something attractive, right, about Hotspur's simplicity in how he views honour, but equally there's something very compelling about, you know, Falstaff's critique of honour as a tool that is being used to manipulate and influence people. Now, jumping in though to Falstaff, you know, he expresses this, and to express it, he says, "What is that honour? Air." What's he talking about? What are the techniques?
Yeah, so I think there's two really obvious techniques in this one. So we've got rhetorical questioning. What is that honour? He's just said a few things about honour, so that's why the word "that" is there. If you go and read the bit, and then so we've got this rhetorical question, and then we've also got him answering with a metaphor, and saying honour is a metaphor for air, or air is a metaphor for honour, rather.
Cool. So we've got two techniques, right? We've got rhetorical questioning. We've got, you know, a metaphor. Do we talk about one, both? What do we do here?
So I think the more techniques that you can show your marker that you've seen in your quote, the better. But remember, it's always important to show the effect of a technique. Make sure you're always showing how does the effect of this technique create meaning. So sometimes I guess what you can do is you can be like, okay, the effect of this technique is this, the effect of the other technique is this, and then analyze them together and bring them together to show how that links to a point.
Cool. So what we're talking about here is don't technique stuff. And that's one of the things that, I often see in essays where someone's trying to get as many techniques in, but they're not actually unpacking and exploring them. And so I think the critical thing here is if you're going to expand essentially on both techniques and how they contribute to create meaning, you put them both in. But don't, whatever you do, put two in and only talk about one. That's the critical thing. So we've got rhetorical questioning here. And so clearly, the point of that is very much like any good rhetorical question. It's designed to get the reader, the audience, to themselves ask the question. And in this case, well, what is honour, right? So it's trying to get an audience to self-reflect on, is honour something that is actually meaningful to them? But on top of this, though, he actually then goes and answers the question. So he's not entirely wanting our audience to think for themselves. He's certainly wanting to influence.
I think if I just cut in there, the way I would interpret that is Shakespeare's trying to make the audience think for themselves through the rhetorical question, but then Falstaff has an answer to that. So then he's like, well, this is Falstaff's perspective on it, but still, you guys need to decide for yourselves what you think honour is. Cool.
I think that's a great way to look at it as well. And so I think if we bring it back now, well, Falstaff's answer is, well, honour is air. And, it's interesting because I think if we look at that, one of the takes, and certainly Falstaff's perspective on it, is that, well, air has no substance, right? You can't see it, and therefore it is just, it's meaningless. It's a mere performance. The thing I do want to highlight here, which, this is just for a bit of fun, I wouldn't necessarily go with this, is that air is, of course, critical for life. It's critical to breathe, right? And so I think maybe the little bit of irony underneath this is that on the one hand, yes, it's meaningless, it's unseen, it lacks substance, but perhaps
I think it's maybe the idea that it's maybe that idea that society is running on it. Despite the fact that it is meaningless, we have society running on honour, the whole sort of world in the War of the Roses that Shakespeare's writing about at the moment is about people going to battle and being soldiers, and it's all to do with honour. So it's almost like the air that they're breathing, but at the same time, it is meaningless.
Awesome. So why is this important? Why is this this idea of performance an important sort of theme that we're
so this theme of performance is really important. When we're talking about performance, we're sort of talking about this idea of something not being real or authentic. When someone is performing something, you don't see their real self. You see this sort of fake self that they've put on to show you to give a sort of false impression of themselves. So this is really important in the play for two reasons. The first one is that it literally is a play. King Henry IV Part 1 is a play. It's kind of, funny and almost ironic that there's this sort of criticism of performance here when the play itself it's a performance. So we've got this sort of meta theatre here. The second reason that's really important is because Falstaff and Hal actually pass time in the tavern creating their own performances. So that there's a couple of occasions where Hal or Falstaff is like, oh, let's make a play of this, or let's act this out. One of is mocking Hotspur in one of them. Talking about Hotspur's wife. But anyway, so I think this is also going to be super important when we start to look at, well, how these two forms of honour that we've just looked at influenced Hal as a character, because not only has Falstaff's perspective on honour influenced Hal and the way he sees it as performative, but through his friendship through Hal and Falstaff's friendship, Hal has sort of learnt this idea of performance. So it's going to sort of come through in his actions in the way that he sees honour. But he's also clearly influenced by his father, isn't he? Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're going to look at. The expectations that King Henry has for, if Hotspur is the paragon of honour, that's the sort of message at the same time, the conflicting message, right, that Hal is experiencing. So we see these two types of honour. We've got Hotspur, the forthright, honest form of honour, no games, no deception, no performance, just get straight in, which is what King Henry's expectation is of his son, the prince. And on the other hand, we've got Falstaff's honour as this deceitful performance. It's a tool to get people to go and fight for a king and die. Right? So
I guess, how do these two come together then, these conflicting views of honour, to shape Hal's own pursuit of honour in the play?
Cool. So Hal isn't really like either of these people, but he's sort of this strange amalgamation of both of them. So he's super far away from Falstaff, who is saying that like honour doesn't even exist. We should just disregard it because it's just crap and it makes people die in wars. And that's obviously not Hal, because Hal goes to war. He becomes this he's seen as this super honourable guy at the end.
He sort of hacks it, doesn't he?
Sorry?
He sort of hacks the system.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's not that. He's also not like Hotspur. He does use all that fancy language, and I guess the thing is, he does not have that straightforward, authentic style of honour at all. What Hal actually is somewhere in between. He has this sort of idea of honour as a performance, which I think he's gained from Falstaff, and I don't think it's really what Falstaff wanted him to gain. He probably wanted him to like reject honour entirely, but he sort of learned to understand that honour is a performance, and he's utilised the fact that it is a performance in order to manipulate others and make himself seem really good and really honourable and really glorious. At the end of the play, when he saves his dad from Douglas, and when he kills Hotspur, and when he's this amazing, honourable guy that sort of is how a lot of people have always interpreted have always interpreted Hal to be.
So Hal really learns to play the game. That's the way that I sort of really view it, right? That he learned, okay, society is rigged right now, despite Falstaff's, sort of criticism of honour. Actually, honour is the thing that everyone looks up to. And yet, at the same time, because it's essentially performative, if I get good at performing it, essentially, I'm going to be able to have that perception of being this incredibly honourable person and really win the game, which I think is interesting for the end outcome of certainly, the play itself. Now, I know there's a key place that we see this in the play, in terms of there's a famous speech in Act 1, Scene 1. Is that right, Brooklyn?
Yep, exactly.
And so what does he say in that speech?
Yeah, so the quote that we've got here is, he's sort of speaking about himself in this quote in third person, but he says, "He may be wondered at by breaking through the foul and ugly mists." And that might not make sense straight away to you if you haven't read the play or haven't read it in depth. But basically what's going on here is we have this metaphor that is talking about this idea of the fact that he's in the tavern is sort of like metaphorical of an ugly cloud covering up the sun. So he's the sun and he's in the tavern and he's sort of living this terrible delinquent life where he's just drinking and wasting his time away. So that's like this sort of ugly cloud that hides him. And then he sort of, at the end of the play, what he's saying he's going to do is he's going to burst through the clouds in sort of the glorious radiance of the sun. And basically the point he's making is, if we look at the quote here, it says he may be more wondered at because he's done this. So the fact that he was in the clouds first, the tavern first, and then he breaks through, makes him even more wonderful than if he was just a sun the whole time. So it's sort of that idea of like we appreciate the sun more when it comes out from behind the clouds.
And it also shows that the development, like, wow, like to go from the taverns to become, maybe by the end of it, maybe not quite the paragon, but certainly, right, the transformation that how undergoes is so significant that's what makes it impressive, right? And so it definitely, though, still sort of, I feel really echoes this element of performance in Hal, right? That actually this is a performance, it's the hero's journey playing out in some respects, going from the darkness to the light.
I think it's really important, though, that it's not an authentic hero's journey, though. Like he's constructed this hero's journey
definitely
for himself, and that makes us really dubious and really like wary at the end when he does actually end up saving the day, saving his dad from Douglas and killing Hotspur. And it makes us think, well, did he really have a moral transformation? And a lot of people who interpret this play will say that, yes, he did have a moral transformation. But I guess our interpretation and where we differ from that is what we're saying is, well, did he really have that moral transformation? Or was it his plan all along to just make himself look really good? Is this honor that he has at the end when he turns out to be so amazing, is that just a performance that he's put on? Cool. So what that does is it brings us to our critic quote who talks about this idea. Rowan, can you read us our critic quote, please?
Yeah, I can. And so I think the thing we need to understand is that critics are really important as part of Module B. And that's because what you're needing to do with part of Module B is really show that you're engaging with the critical perspectives about the text. I mean, ultimately, it's a critical study here. So the critic that we're going to reference is a guy called Matthew H. Wikander. I'm probably mispronouncing this guy's name.
Wakanda? I don't know.
Wakanda. It sounds like Wakanda from...
Yeah, exactly. That was my fault.
Go with that. That sounds cool, right? And so, he basically says that the scheming, conniving nature of the speech that Hal gives really shows that we feel ourselves, sort of caught short by this description of Hal's strategy because it suggests the fraud. And so we're using that to really, in this case, reinforce our perspective that we're trying to highlight of Hal's honor here, which is that maybe it's not really authentic. Maybe actually he's just decided to game the system and use it performatively to his own benefit to show that he's honourable when really he's the same person underneath all of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good way that we've used the quote there. And that's that we've been really specific in the way that that critic quote has come in. So it hasn't just sort of been this vague general idea. It's actually a quote about the example that we've just given in our paragraph. So that's really a great way to use critic quotes is show that you've done a lot of reading, because if you can literally find a quote that's about the example you're giving, that shows sort of a more a further depth of understanding from sort of what the critics are saying about the text.
Awesome. So to sum it all up, we've got Henry expecting Hal, his son, to have that straightforward, vengeful style of honor, which is really typified, or the archetype for that is really Hotspur, throughout the play. Now, this is, of course, conflicted by the honor that's presented, or the image of honor that's certainly presented by Falstaff, which is that it's a construct, that it is this thing, a fictional thing that is being used to cause people to do things that they may not want. Now, of course, ultimately, what we see is that Hal's eventual honour that we see represented is really an amalgamation, right? It's somewhere in the middle. It's somewhat deceptive and performative. It's made to appear straightforward. We're sort of left at the end with this sort of sense that while Hal is held up as a beacon of honour, maybe it's not really as authentic as he would at least like us to believe. Yeah.
And I think, if you would sort of fit this into a essay as a whole, I mean, what you don't have to do this, but one thing you could do is you could sort of talk about that idea of Shakespeare, like maybe your thesis could be about how Shakespeare is forcing us to ask questions about the nature of honour and leadership and so on, rather than sort of giving us and providing us answers. And that's really what I think he does through these three forms of honour. He doesn't say this honour is better or this honour is better, because I guess Hal's honour is really effective, but he sort of shows us that it's also super kind of immoral and a bit dodgy.
That comes back to the idea that we sort of shared earlier, that really, at the end of the day, all three types of honour that are presented in their own rights are very compelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I think you're very right there. Shakespeare, at least here, certainly is not making it clear which one is the right one. It is really left up to us as a reader to decide, well, I think it's, I agree with, Henry, Hotspur, that's honour.
So what team are you on, Rowan? Who's your favourite, honestly?
Look, I'm part of me loves Falstaff, but I think in the end I
knew you were going to say you were a Hotspur.
No. I think I would end up sitting with
Hal
on this one. Yeah.
Oh, no way. That's crazy. Hal is the worst. I hate Hal.
I'm so torn, right? I'm so torn because part of Hotspur definitely appeals, right? Just the idea of integrity, say what you do what you say, sort of thing, right? That's how I really view Hotspur. And so part of me is like, yes. And then on the same time, though, you know, I'm like, well, but, you know, they're just getting people killed over what is something that is actually not that meaningful, which is why then I move all the way back to Falstaff. And I'm like, well, I get his point, you know, like things, why fight over this? You know, like why kill so many people? And I guess that's why I look at that in that context, right? And then in the middle, well, maybe that's where Hal's approach then sort of ends up balancing the two, you know? It's like, how do we do it? Which is why in the end I sort of feel quite conflicted, maybe how Hal actually feels. And I see then, of course, if we were to take this, I think, out of the context of war and fighting over, you know, the royal house, I think, yeah, my personal approach would probably lean a little more to Hotspur, right? Just in the sense of, being this is what it is, right?
Authentic guy. Yeah, I'm a Hal hater. I think he's so inauthentic. Yeah, he's the worst. I really, really like Hotspur because I definitely have a soft spot for that authenticity that he has, and he's just so, I don't know, it's just kind of cute how straightforward he is.
Also naive, I feel.
No, yeah, right? I think that naivety is really sort of compelling in a way. But then definitely my favorite, I would have to say, is Falstaff. Like, I love his cynicism. I'm a cynic through and through. So yeah, I'm a fan of Falstaff.
So guys, like we left that till the very end. So, you know, that's the little Easter egg at the very end. Made it all the way through. So if you made it all the way through to this little Easter egg at the end, let us know below in the comments, which team are you, right? Are you a team Hal? Are you a team Hotspur? Are you a team Falstaff? And
are you a team King Henry? I don't. I think he's a bit useless as well, but maybe you are.
Yeah, that's right. Let us know what team you're on. Leave it in the comments below. Now, of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. We're going to bring loads more videos, English, other subjects, study tips and more. So make sure that you hit subscribe so you stay in touch with videos as we bring them out every single week. If there's anything Brooklyn and I can do to help, leave a comment below. If there's something you don't understand about King Henry IV, anything we've shared in the video today, let us know, and either one of us or one of our team will jump on and get you your answer. Of course, if you need more support, you've got a King Henry, the essay, you're staring at it, it's freaking you out. We've got an incredible team of teachers, tutors, and mentors that can work with you. So don't be shy. Get in touch with us. Visit artistsmart.com.au. Otherwise, stay safe, and we will see you in our next episode of #Help.